I remember her twitching under me, trying to get free, but I didn't let her go until after I was done. Enjoy the story. I stood at the edge of my dream, watching the grand opening of my luxury hotel unfold before me. It was everything I'd envisioned, sleek, modern, and flawless. The chandeliers in the grand lobby shimmered like stars, and the suites, with their floor-to-ceiling windows, offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. Every detail was perfect, a culmination of years spent in real estate, saving every penny, sacrificing countless hours. And today, finally, was the day I would see it all come to life. Claire, my wife of over 2 decades, stood beside me, her arm looped through mine. She had always supported my ambitions, or so I had believed. Tonight, she seemed more excited than I was, almost too excited. Her enthusiasm had caught me off guard, but I chalked it up to pre-event jitters. After all, Claire had insisted on managing the party arrangements herself, from curating the guest list to hiring the staff. I was grateful for her help, especially with how overwhelming the final preparations had become. The event promised to be a spectacle, the culmination of everything we'd worked for. Local celebrities, powerful business figures, and journalists were all in attendance, their laughter and clinking glasses filling the lobby. Claire, ever the social butterfly, moved through the room effortlessly, charming everyone she met. She had even hired a young, attractive staff for the evening, which, while a bit curious, I dismissed as part of her meticulous attention to detail. But despite the grandeur of the evening, I couldn't enjoy it. My head throbbed, and my stomach twisted with a sudden illness that had hit me just hours before the opening. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Don't worry, love," Claire whispered, pressing a cool kiss to my forehead. "I've got it all under control. You just rest." I watched her for a moment, smiling as she reassured me. But something about her tone felt off, like a distant note of rehearsed calm. Still, I was too exhausted to question it. Feeling guilty but powerless, I left the celebration in her hands. The sounds of music and laughter echoed in my ears as I slipped away, the vision of my dream fading behind me as I headed home. Lying in bed that night, a strange unease crept over me. Claire had been different lately, distant. She'd thrown herself into managing the hotel, often staying late to handle staffing or event planning on her own. I wanted to believe it was just the stress of our new venture, that I was reading too much into her behavior. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself I was overreacting. Claire loved me. She'd stood by me through thick and thin. We were a team, weren't we? But even as I closed my eyes, the doubts lingered, refusing to let me rest. The next morning, despite still feeling unwell, I forced myself out of bed and returned to the hotel. I needed to see how the event had gone, to hear about the success that I had been too ill to witness. I expected glowing praise, compliments on the venue, stories of who had attended, and perhaps even congratulations on the launch. Instead, I was greeted by something far more unsettling. The smiles from the staff were polite but strained, their eyes darting away when I tried to make conversation. A few guests who had stayed overnight avoided my gaze, exchanging awkward glances as I passed by. The air felt thick with something unspoken, a tension that clung to the walls like an invisible stain. My stomach churned, but not from the illness this time. Something had happened last night, something I wasn't a part of. Several staff members greeted me as I stepped deeper into the hotel, but their smiles were tight, their nods quick and awkward. There was something off in the way they looked at me, like they were in on a secret I wasn't privy to. They barely made eye contact, their glances flitting away as soon as I spoke. A few of the guests who had stayed overnight mirrored the same behavior, polite but distant, exchanging brief, uneasy looks as I passed by. The entire atmosphere felt tainted. And then there was Claire. She was nowhere to be found. In the chaos of post-event management, her absence could have been explained easily. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. But today, it gnawed at me feeding the unease that had started to simmer the night before. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I approached the front desk, my eyes narrowing slightly as I spotted one of the young receptionists Claire had personally hired. A boy who couldn't have been older than 20. He looked nervous, more so than I would have expected. I kept my tone light casual. "So, how did the event go?" The boy fumbled with some papers before glancing up, his face flushed. "It went well, sir," he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. The guest seemed happy. His words were flat, rehearsed even, but his body language betrayed him. He was uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. I studied him for a moment, watching as his gaze darted toward the back office, before he quickly excused himself and disappeared behind the door. A cold knot of dread tightened in my chest. Something had happened last night, something they weren't telling me. I decided to walk through the hotel myself, my unease growing with every step. The hallways were quieter than usual, the staff going about their duties, but there was an underlying tension, a murmur of hushed voices that seemed to evaporate the moment I got too close. Conversations halted, heads turned away, as if my presence disrupted some invisible balance. It was like I had walked into the aftermath of a disaster, but no one wanted to acknowledge it. And then, as I turned a corner, I heard something that made my blood run cold. 2 housekeepers were standing near the linen closet, talking in low voices, their words carrying just far enough for me to catch. "Did you see Mrs. Miller with those guests last night?" One of them whispered, her tone edged with disbelief. "Yeah," the other replied, glancing over her shoulder. "She was all over them. I mean, she wasn't even trying to hide it. It was weird." I froze. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat reverberating in my ears. Mrs. Miller. My wife. Claire. My mind raced, 1,000 scenarios flooding in at once, but none of them made sense. Claire? With the guests? Being all over them? No. It couldn't be true. Not her. Not the woman I had built my life with. The woman I had trusted with everything. We had been through too much for this, hadn't we? I stepped back before they could see me, the hallway spinning slightly as the conversation replayed in my mind. Claire was hiding something. I didn't know what, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. My stomach churned with the weight of the realization. I needed to find her. Now. I moved quickly through the hotel, scanning every corner, every lounge, my anxiety mounting with each empty room. Finally, I spotted her in the hotel's lounge, sitting with a few remaining guests, sipping coffee and laughing as if nothing had happened. From a distance, she looked radiant, composed, the perfect hostess, the perfect wife. But there was something off about her laugh. It was too light, too free, as though she were forcing it. And the way she smiled at the guests, too broad, too relaxed, it felt wrong, almost hollow, as if she were playing a part she no longer believed in. I stopped just outside her line of sight, watching her for a moment, a strange chill settling in my bones. This wasn't the Claire I knew. Or maybe this was the real Claire, and I had been blind to it all along. Claire saw me approaching and flashed that perfect smile. The same smile that once made me feel like the luckiest man alive. It was a smile that, for years, had melted away my doubts, my fears. But now it felt wrong. "There you are," she said brightly, standing to kiss me on the cheek. "Feeling better, love?" I nodded, but inside my stomach twisted in knots. There was something unsettling in the way she looked at me, her eyes glimmering with an innocence I no longer trusted. The woman standing before me, the one I had shared 2 decades of my life with, was hiding something. Something dark. But I didn't confront her. Not then. I wasn't ready for what that confrontation might reveal. Instead, I smiled, played the part of the loving husband, and engaged in idle conversation with the guests. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. Claire's laughter, the clinking glasses, the idle chatter. But in the back of my mind, a storm raged, one I couldn't control. I needed answers, and I would get them, one way or another. In the days following the grand opening, The weight of suspicion grew like a thorn lodged deep in my mind, impossible to ignore. Claire acted as though nothing had changed. She returned to her usual routine of managing the hotel, making calls to suppliers, coordinating events, charming, attentive, and ever involved. The perfect wife. But now, every word that left her lips felt rehearsed. Every smile seemed like a mask, carefully placed to hide the truth underneath. What I had overheard, those whispered words about her and the guests, gnawed at me. It replayed in my mind, louder with each passing day. And the more I thought about it, the more I started noticing things I had overlooked before. Claire was spending more time at the hotel, long hours that stretched into late nights. At first it seemed reasonable. We had just opened the business after all. But then there were the mysterious meetings she never mentioned, and the increasing number of young, handsome male staff she insisted on hiring. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But the seed had already been planted, and it was growing fast. One evening, after closing hours, I sat alone in the dimly lit hotel lounge, nursing a drink and watching the quiet shadows stretch across the empty room. The staff was winding down, clearing tables, and preparing to leave for the night. I didn't want to go home. Not yet. I couldn't face the questions gnawing at my mind, the doubt that now consumed me. That's when I overheard them. Two of the young male staff, employees Claire had personally hired, were talking just beyond the lounge, their voices carrying through the quiet space. They didn't see me, hidden behind the shadow of a column. "She's something, isn't she?" one of them said with a low chuckle. "Yeah," the other replied, his tone dripping with amusement. "No wonder she picked you for the event staff. She's got a type." I felt a jolt of unease ripple through me. "Do you think he knows?" the second one asked. "Her husband?" The first one let out a quiet snicker. "No way. She's got him wrapped around her finger." Their voices trailed off as they continued down the hall, leaving me alone in stunned silence. The weight of their words hit me like a brick to the chest. Claire has a type? The way they spoke about her, it wasn't casual gossip. There was a knowing, a certain familiarity. They weren't just speculating. They knew something. My mind reeled. Claire, my wife, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, was deceiving me. But how deep did the betrayal run? Was it just a fleeting indiscretion at the party? Or had this been happening for months? Years? How many lies had she told while I had been consumed with building our future? I felt my stomach churn, a sickening realization settling in my bones. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but my instincts told me to wait. I needed more than suspicions. I needed proof. That night, when Claire was sound asleep, I slipped out of bed and crept into her office. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting pale beams across her cluttered desk. In the stillness of the night, I began searching, rifling through the drawers, the papers, anything that might reveal the truth. My hands moved quickly, driven by a need I could no longer suppress. Invoices, contracts, guest lists. It was all there, but none of it mattered. What I was looking for wasn't on paper. And then I found it. Her phone. I knew her password, of course. We had never kept secrets from each other. Or at least, that's what I believed. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. Part of me didn't want to do this, didn't want to be the kind of man who snoops through his wife's phone. But it was too late for that. I needed to know. What I found would change everything. My hands trembled as I unlocked the screen. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who snoops through his wife's phone, desperate for answers. But I couldn't stop myself. Too many things weren't adding up, and the gnawing feeling in my gut had reached a boiling point. I needed to know the truth, no matter the cost. What I found shattered whatever fragile hope I'd clung to. The messages were there, plain as day, intimate, explicit exchanges between Claire and multiple men. Most of them were guests from the hotel's opening night. But what chilled me to my core was that these weren't just meaningless flings. No, the conversations hinted at something far deeper, a pattern that stretched back years. Long-term affairs. Hidden rendezvous. She'd been using the hotel as a cover, sleeping with strangers, while I had been blinded by my trust in her. I stared at the screen, disbelief tightening around my chest like a vice. The wife I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was a stranger. A liar. She had been living a double life, and I had been too blind, too trusting to see it. The realization hit me like a wave, but instead of drowning in it, I felt something else rise within me. Rage. Cold, simmering rage. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. A confrontation would be too easy, too quick. If she had managed to deceive me for all these years, she wouldn't walk away from this without feeling the full weight of her betrayal. No, if Claire thought she could make a fool of me and escape unscathed, she was gravely mistaken. This was going to be slow, calculated. I would plan it perfectly, down to the last detail. And when the time came, she would pay for every lie, every deceitful smile, every moment of humiliation she had caused me. Days passed, but I was careful. My outward behavior remained unchanged, my routine as steady as ever. Every morning, Claire kissed me on the cheek before heading to the hotel. And every evening, she returned home to a husband who smiled, told her he loved her, and acted as if nothing had changed. But inside, my thoughts twisted with vengeance. Every time she touched me, every time she laughed at something trivial, I felt the bile rise in my throat. I wanted to break her, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me, quietly, methodically. I started playing my part with precision. I suggested romantic gestures, small things at first, dinners, late-night talks, walks in the park, things that made it seem like I was eager to rekindle what we had lost. Claire took the bait, believing she had me under her thumb. She smiled more, kissed me more, probably thinking she was clever enough to keep up the charade. When I proposed a weekend getaway, just the two of us, she didn't hesitate. Her face lit up with excitement, and I knew then that she had no idea. She thought she still had me wrapped around her finger, just like those boys at the hotel had said. Just the two of us, I said. We haven't had much time together lately. Let's take a break, somewhere remote. Get away from it all. Claire's smile widened. That sounds wonderful. Just what we need. Her eagerness made my stomach turn, but I smiled back. I'll handle all the arrangements. It'll be a surprise. In truth, every detail had been meticulously planned, down to the isolated lakehouse I had rented, tucked away hours outside the city. A perfect place, where no one would hear a thing. She thought we were going to reconnect, to reignite the spark we once shared. But I had other plans. On the day of the trip, we packed light, just a few essentials for the weekend. As we drove through the countryside, Claire was practically glowing, chatting endlessly about how good this would be for us, how excited she was to relax, to spend time together. Her words were sweet, but they felt like poison on my skin. Every sentence she uttered was another reminder of how deeply she had betrayed me. Yet, I remained calm, nodding, smiling, playing my part to perfection. We arrived at the lakehouse just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and pink. The house itself was beautiful, nestled between towering trees, overlooking the still, glass-like waters of the lake. It was the kind of place people dreamed of escaping to. Peaceful, serene. Claire stepped out of the car and walked to the edge of the dock, gazing out at the water. She turned back to me with a smile that was almost childlike in its innocence. "This is perfect," she said softly. "Thank you for this." I walked up beside her, feeling the cool breeze brush against my skin. I offered her a small smile, my voice calm and measured. "We deserve it." She nodded, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath my surface. To her, this was just the beginning of a romantic getaway, a fresh start. But for me it was the end, the beginning of the end. Later that evening, after dinner, I suggested we take the boat out on the lake. Claire, ever eager for romantic gestures, smiled brightly, thinking this was just another attempt at rekindling our love. The boat rocked gently as I rowed us out, the house shrinking behind us until only the rippling waves surrounded us. Above, the night sky hung heavy, the moon and stars casting faint light over the vast, empty lake. It was time. Sitting across from her, I let the oars rest in the water, allowing the boat to drift in silence. Claire's face, bathed in soft moonlight, was expectant, relaxed. She had no idea. "Do you remember when we used to talk for hours?" I asked, my voice low, calm. "When there were no secrets between us?" She smiled warmly, nodding. "Of course. We were always so honest with each other." I studied her, searching for some flicker of guilt, but she was serene, completely unaware. How could she lie so easily? How could she pretend to be the loving wife after everything she had done? "Funny you should say that," I murmured, my voice growing colder. "Because I think you've been keeping secrets from me, Claire." Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing as confusion and fear flickered across her face. "What do you mean?" "I know," I said, my words cutting through the silence like a knife. "About the men, the guests, the hotel staff. All of it." Her face paled, and for a moment she was motionless, like a deer caught in headlights. Then panic seized her and she sputtered, I don't. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, my voice suddenly sharp. "I've seen the messages. I know everything." Claire's breath hitched, and her fear became palpable. Her eyes darted, searching for something, anything, to grasp onto. "I can't explain, please." But I wasn't interested in explanations. I had heard enough lies. "How long?" I asked, my tone eerily calm now, the eye of the storm. "How long have you been doing this behind my back?" She stammered, struggling to find the right words. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never meant for it to go so far." I laughed, then, a hollow, bitter sound that seemed to hang in the air. "You never meant for it to go so far? You've been lying for years, Claire." How many men?" She began to cry, her hands trembling as she reached out to me. "Please, we can fix this. I love you." I recoiled from her touch, disgusted. "You don't know what love is." The silence that followed was suffocating. The boat drifted in the middle of the lake, the water gently lapping against its sides. Claire's sobs filled the night air, but I felt nothing. I was unmoved, cold. I stood slowly, looking down at her as she cried. In that moment I made my decision. The water was deep, the lake vast and isolated. No one would ever find her out here. And in the darkness of that quiet night, Claire learned the true price of betrayal. The morning sun broke over the horizon as I rowed back to shore. The light cast long shadows across the glassy surface of the lake, the air cool and crisp, almost cleansing. Each pull of the oars felt heavy, yet deliberate, as if with each stroke I was pushing myself further from everything that had happened out there in the dark. By the time I reached the dock, the world around me was untouched, serene. Birds began their morning chorus. Trees swayed gently in the breeze. It was as though nothing had changed, as though the night had never happened at all. But I had changed. Something inside me had shifted, something darker, more resolute. I tied the boat to the dock and took a moment to glance back over the water. The lake was still, as if it had swallowed the truth whole. The air was quiet. Claire was gone, and there would be no trace of what had happened. I had made sure of that. As I made my way back to the lakehouse, I moved with an eerie sense of calm. My mind was empty, as though the storm of emotions that had consumed me for days had been completely washed away. The anger, the betrayal, the need for revenge, they were all gone, left behind in the cold depths of the lake. I packed our things into the car, careful and deliberate, as though I were simply wrapping up a peaceful weekend retreat. There was no rush. No one would question me when I returned home alone. Claire and I had often taken trips together over the years. People knew we did our own thing sometimes. If anyone asked, I could easily say she'd extended her stay or gone somewhere else for personal reasons. I'd make up the details when the time came. For now, there was only silence. The drive back was long but uneventful. The countryside blurred, the empty road stretching on as I left the lake behind. The farther I drove, the more distant it all felt, like a bad dream slowly dissolving in the light of day. Time slipped away unnoticed until I pulled into our driveway, greeted by the familiar sights of home. Inside, everything was just as we'd left it. The house seemed untouched by the events of the weekend. The kitchen still spotless, the bed neatly made. I stood there for a moment taking it in. This was the life we had built together, a life built on lies. But now, those lies were gone. It was just me. I walked into the bedroom and stood in front of the mirror, gazing at my reflection. The man staring back at me looked calm, composed. But beneath the surface, something darker lurked, something I had unleashed. I had done what needed to be done, and though the full weight of my actions hadn't hit me yet, I knew I wouldn't regret them. Claire had made her choices. She had betrayed me, and now she had paid the price. There was no going back, only forward. I turned away from the mirror and walked downstairs into the stillness of the living room. The house felt oddly peaceful without her presence. I sat down, listening to the quiet that now filled the space. Outside, the world continued on, oblivious to what had been set in motion beneath the surface of that dark lake. No one would ever know. No one needed to. And as I sat there, alone in the house that had once been ours, a strange sense of peace settled over me. Perhaps this was what I had needed all along, a way to wipe the slate clean, to start over. But I knew the end wasn't truly an end. The weight of what I'd done would stay with me, lingering in the quiet moments, in the empty spaces where Claire had once been. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was free, free from her lies, free from her deceit. As the day faded into night, I sat in the silence, knowing that, in the end, I had taken control of my life. No matter what came next, I had decided how it would end. Thanks for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe, and comment below.